Hello, and thank you for joining us for this webinar today entitled 3 Key Business Objectives to Align Your Training Programs in 2022. We are pleased to have our distinguished panel here who will be highlighting how today's training programs are creating a demand for mobile training and content, reducing risk while also supporting and extending the reach into the workforce. Today, we're lucky we have Gary Underhill, Vice President of Solution Consulting for Meridian Knowledge Solutions. Gary has worked with leading e-learning companies across the industry and has been named #2 in the top 10 LMS trusted advisors, demonstrators in the world by Talented Learning magazine. Next, we have Sean Osborne, Senior Vice President, Product and Growth Strategy for Meridian Knowledge Solutions. Sean is a seasoned product leader and strategist with extensive experience in enterprise software products delivered to prominent government and regulated industries. Most recently, Sean was a management consultant at Slalom, where he focused on transformative data-driven software applications for large financial institutions. And finally, we have Paige Crackey, who is a content curation enthusiast, an explorer of new technologies, and a lifelong learner, currently serving as the Senior Manager of Curation at OpenSesame. In 2020, Paige was recognized as one of Learning's 30 under 30 for a demonstrated leadership and innovation in the online learning space. Thank you to our panelists today for joining us. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the Q&A and we will address those individually at the end. So without further ado, I will hand off to Sean Osborne. Sean.
Thank you, Lauren, and welcome everyone. We're very pleased to be speaking with you today. Really, if we could cover one thing today, it's really to help you get the year in your organization off right when it comes to learning. And, looking at 2022, and if Gary, if we could go forward a couple slides, please. If we really focus on starting 2022 off right, we're going to focus on 3 objectives that we think will benefit your organization for the year. Gary, do you mind going to the next slide? The first is managing your risk, through your learning programs. If you look at our current environment, we all obviously live in a time of uncertainty. No one knows what the next phase of the COVID pandemic will bring. No one knows when we will return fully to a normal in-person world or when our traditional learning programs will be able to fully transition back into learning or into in-person. We also don't know what the economic situation is going to continue to look like. If you look at kind of the year-over-year inflationary numbers just last month, we were running at about a 7% annualized rate, which is the highest we've had in 40 years. The bottom line is that we exist and we must work in an environment that is highly uncertain, and we must plan to reduce the risk that comes to our organizations from that uncertainty. So that's our first goal. Our second goal is to continue to help driving forward our workforce through learning. If you look at the labor market today, there's about 11 million positions open in the United States. There are not enough people to fill those positions who want to be in the workforce. Additionally, people look to their employer more than ever before to help them grow in their careers. So they have the ability to move to other organizations very easily in many cases. And if you don't help them grow your careers, you're much more likely to lose those employees. So the second goal we propose aligning around for this year is continuing to grow your workforce. And the third goal we'd like to align around this year is helping your organization do more through learning outside of your organization. So with this goal, you can grow your bottom line, you can grow your relationships with your customers, and you can grow your relationships with partners that help you reach your customers if you make learning available outside of your physical or virtual walls. But before we get started and really get into the first objective in a little bit more detail, we'd like to run a poll. Would you mind telling us about the types of learning you support today? So is the main function of the training you provide training internal employees, training external learners who are not employed within your organization, or training both internal and external learners? We'll give it a few more seconds to let everyone respond. All right, Gary, would you like to flip the poll? So it looks like about half of you are focused on training internal employees, and the rest mainly focus on a mix of both internal and external members. That will help us provide a little bit more commentary during our discussion geared to your needs. Gary, I will turn over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate being here with everybody today and looking forward to my part of the presentation. So I'm going to be talking a little bit today about risk and compliance and the combination of the two. So what I want to start out by talking about today is the benefits of risk reduction as it relates to compliance. And on this particular slide, you can see that there's really two parts of it, the direct and the indirect. But really, you know, on the slide here, you can see that it talks about there's 6 particular items that are called out. But really, this is just the tip of the iceberg, you know, that we're really calling out here, you know, as it relates to the benefits. You know, if I look at one of them, for example, over there on the right side, the improved reputation as an example. You know, listen, we all know, you know, the news today has got, you know, we're all feeling it, you know, corporate America, you know, hiring is a major issue. You know, the term that's often being used is the Great Resignation. And so if, you know, your organization is dealing with, you know, a reputation issue, you know, if you're having, you know, if your company is in the news, not for the right reasons, that just makes it all the more reason of, you know, folks not wanting to come on board, you know, or folks that are working with you today or for you today are, you know, potentially looking to leave the organization. It gives them one more reason to potentially look. So, you know, when we look at these, you know, the benefits, and we talk about, you know, compliance and on the next couple slides and so forth, I'll be talking about, you know, training and compliance and so forth. It's really, you know, that correlation there, you know, between training and risks and compliance and so forth, they all go together. And in the world we're living today, it just becomes much more heightened in terms of, you know, what it all means to the organizations. You know, the other thing that, of course, we're finding today is the tools, the technology that is in the hands of the common everyday person to see compliance issues. You know, back prior to the advent of cell phones, as an example, you know, the issue of the everyday user walking down the street or working in an organization, as an example, and not being able to take a picture or a video or post something on Facebook, Instagram, and so forth of a compliance issue, you know, of some organization, you know, doing something wrong was not an issue. And so you heard a lot less, you didn't see it, it wasn't publicized as much in the news, you know, we didn't have social media like we do today. And so again, you just didn't hear about these things as much as you do today. And so, as I said, on the slides, you know, that we're seeing here, these, you know, risks and so forth are just so much more heightened today, just simply because of what we're exposed to, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and so forth. So this notion, and as I'll be talking about in these next couple slides, this goal of reducing the risk, making sure that the organization is, you know, managing their compliance is just so important, you know, because of everything that that we're dealing with. So let's go on and talk about, you know, and this is one of the studies that Brandon Hall group did, and one of the things they were looking at is, reducing risk and compliance training. So they did a study looking at a couple different options, and they broke the groups down into, you can see the levels here: meeting regulatory requirements, certifying employees, and the last group there. And I've kind of broken these groups down, and I've given them some nicknames. The first group I call the because I said so group. So this is the group that, remember when you were a kid and you asked your mom, why do I have to eat my vegetables? And your mom said, because I said so. Well, this meets the regulatory requirements. The 42% is the group that the company says, this is what you have to take. These are your, anti-bribery classes, your sexual harassment training, and so forth. So this is the because I said so, classes and compliance training that you have to take, and this is part of these organizations that require this training. Then you move into the next group, the middle group, that is frankly one of the toughest groups to talk about, because they're not only doing the meeting of the regulatory requirements, but this group, management feels like they're actually in some ways taking care of their employees, and in some ways the employees think that they're being taken care of as well, because they're certifying the employees, so they think they're being developed. But in reality, this group I almost call the follow the bouncing ball, meaning that, if any of you do karaoke as an example, and when you're doing the karaoke and the little ball is, going along on the words, and you're following along, the music is helping you to keep up to the specific words in the music. Well, that's really all the certification of the employees is doing. You're not really understanding why you're taking the courses you are. You just know that, as a manager, as a manufacturing operator, as an individual in the organization, you're simply taking this course to get certified in a certain skill or a certain profession, but you're just simply being what I call being trained. You're not really being educated. And I'll talk more about training versus education on the next slide. So this is simply a certification in the bouncing ball paradigm. This last group, though, is the one that's truly making a difference. This is the group that's giving their employees the true development of the talent. This is the group that, as you'll see in one of the next couple slides, is part of this high-performing organization that is making a difference. So that first 66%, those first two groups make up approximately 66% of the population, are really not developing their talent. They're not giving the employees the why. And so what's happening is, if things get a little bit out of whack, I spent the last several years of my career in the pharmaceutical industry. And sometimes if the test and you were doing some mixing of chemicals, if it didn't come out exactly right, sometimes you would move the process along to the next stage. You didn't really understand if you were doing the right thing, and sometimes it was okay, and sometimes it was not. You were actually passing along a bad mixture of chemical, but it sort of was the right color, it sort of was the right product, but you weren't exactly sure. And that's where a company can get into trouble, is when you're sort of doing things right and you're sort of in compliance. And that's when things get into trouble. So that's really, what I wanted to bring up there. So on this particular slide, we actually have a poll here as well. So we're going to launch this. And with this particular poll, the question becomes, do you currently align your business objectives to your training program? So a simple yes, no, or simply not sure. So we'll wait for a couple folks to answer the question here. So looking like getting just a couple more seconds here to give a couple more folks the chance. And looks like we've got everybody. So we'll share these results. And looking at the results here, again, looks like evenly split between the yeses and the not sures. which is actually, pretty much what we expected. So it's good to see the yeses, really encouraging number there. And then on the not sures, that's actually not surprising there. Again, often the not sures come with folks that are, again, they're taking the training. They're not sure, as you'll see on one of the next slides, I talk about training and education being part of the DNA of an organization. And that's really just a key factor of how education helps to alleviate some of the risk is it becomes really part of the overall DNA or overall culture of the organization. So let's start to get into that and talk about that. So on this particular slide, what I really like to talk about, and I've been in the L&D space, gosh, close to 20 years now. And one of the things that I really like when I talk to folks in the L&D learning and development space is that it's really time to start thinking about learning and development differently, meaning that often learning and development thinks in terms of completions and course launches and how many people have taken course X and Y and Z and so forth. And unfortunately, that doesn't really help with the overall compliance, managing risk and so forth. What we really want to do is move the organization from a training mindset to an education mindset. So that'll help learning move more towards the CXO table and help avoid these things, because studies have shown that often with these compliance issues and the risk issues, it's not that somebody was really a malcontent and they purposely tried to hurt the company. Often it was simply they tried to do the right thing and just accidentally did something incorrectly. They thought the color, on the chemical, they were told, if the color is green, move it to the next step. Well, it was a sort of green, but it was a greenish blue. So they moved it to the next step, but they didn't realize that blue actually meant that the product was contaminated and actually brought in, a bad product. So that's where we need to bring in this concept of why. Why are we doing this training? What is it, the training that we're doing? And when we bring in the why to the training, it actually moves it from training to education. Because training really, I think about, my dog, when I train her, I hold up a little treat and she knows that when I do that, certain actions require her to shake my hand or to lie down. But education then makes us understand what it is that this training is doing. It's not just simply checking the box so that we can get to the end of the exercise or get to the end of the assignment, but it's truly giving us that why. So when I look at this particular slide, and I look at that right side, the high performing organizations, those high pos that I talked about a little bit earlier, when they've moved to that why side, when they've moved to that education versus training, this is what they've been able to improve on. They've been able to engage their employees in customer satisfaction, the turnover, the hiring process, all these things that I mentioned earlier on have been able to improve upon. And then looking at that middle section there of the slide, these are just some of the items as it relates to compliance training that they've actually utilized as it relates to education. So they've used more mobile friendly training, something that different generations are much more comfortable with. They've looked at their organization and said, we're a global organization. So why is our training only in English? We need to translate it for different languages, different cultures, different geographies. How can we take different training methods? So why is it only classroom based or virtual classroom based? What about role plays? What about simulations? What about other different types of methods to use? So that's what we really want to do, is connect different ways of doing things, different methods and so forth, in order to make our compliance training more effective, reduce that risk, and have better outcomes for our organization. So kind of wrapping things up here on this slide, we took one particular item from this Brandon Hall study and looked at specific competencies in high performing versus low performing organizations. And then what we did is we further delineated and just took out the middle section. So we only looked at people, organizations that said, we developed these competencies completely, meaning all the time, numerical item number 5 here on the chart, versus organizations that said, no, we never develop competency. So the 1s versus the 5s. And again, we kind of threw out the 2s, 3s, and 4s. So that's why this chart only represents approximately 30% on the high performing versus 30% on the lows. But you can see here that on the high performing organizations, it's roughly 30% to the low performing 10%. So a 3-to-1 ratio of where they develop their competencies and are truly going back to one of those previous slides that you saw, that employee development, that talent development of truly using competencies to develop the organization, to develop the individual, to reduce the risk, to manage the compliance. You know, it's that loop there to truly bring the organization in, to bring it part of the DNA or the culture of the organization. So with that, to talk a little bit more about competencies and how all this fits together, I'm actually going to turn this over to Paige to talk about supporting your workforce.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gary. And I love that chart that was on the last slide. I really do find that here at OpenSesame, whenever we're embarking on a curation exercise, the center of any successful exercise is that competency framework. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we can support learners through adding context to learning. So this first sentence here, I love. I actually learned it and took it away from a curation-specific workshop that I attended back in the good old days when we could travel around, miss them. But this sentence, curate the context, not just the content. And I loved that because it speaks to this why that we're mentioning, that we're talking about here, shifting from the mom who's annoyed and says, you just got to eat your vegetables, just do it because I told you so, and moving into this world where we're contextualizing the entire experience. So we understand why vegetables are good for us, and we understand where they fit in to the food pyramid or whatever we're using these days. And we're giving context to learning. So one of the most important tools to add context is this concept of the competency framework. And this can look a lot of different ways. I'm sure that many people on this call are familiar with, a basic competency framework. Many probably have one built out or have seen, third parties' versions of different leadership competency frameworks, general across the board business power skills competencies, compliance competencies. So there's all sorts of different versions of this little mini diagram here. I've seen hundreds, maybe thousands from enterprises that we support and curate content for. So I just took a little amalgamation of a couple, kind of a microcosm of what a competency framework looks like when we're talking about this. And it's not rocket science, right? It's not like it can get complicated. We can say we have sub skills and skill descriptions and leveling within a framework. But at its core, a competency framework is tying skills, which are these purple boxes, to broader competencies. And a great competency framework ties those competencies to company values and culture and vision. So when we are working in this ecosystem of our competency framework, in an ideal world, step one is we build it out, we identify our needs, and we identify our skills that we're targeting. But step two is we're tying this competency framework to the company, the common language, the thread that's interwoven at the company level. And we're providing people this added layer of context. So the thing that I kind of struggle with sometimes here with organizations who maybe have already built this out as a learning team or as a, the training team. We've built out this beautiful selection of competencies. We know it like the back of our hands because we've made this, or we've worked with a third party to create this, but it's not ingrained at the wider level. We don't extend past this training bubble to get to the company, the organization, the leadership and executive language that's being used, the onboarding language that we're using when we're talking to candidates and when we're marketing our company. So when you can create that added layer of connection and contextualization, you're really getting to the true why. And it's not as simple. I mean, the first step is we send out a course and we make sure people understand which skill we're targeting and which competency that's tied to. That's great. But when we can extend beyond the course level and start to weave that into the language of the company, of onboarding and training and learning in general, infuse this language in lunch and learns, infuse this language in full company meetings or full team meetings. That's where we really want to get to when we're thinking about a successful competency framework that adds context. So we're giving people this guiding light. One thing I like to think about when having this conversation is the concept of being supportive versus directive. And this is the leadership framework that many people are likely familiar with, a supportive versus a directive leader. Directive leaders will tell you what to do, perhaps not provide the why. They'll say exactly what you need to do. But a supportive leader is going to provide the tools that are required and provide maybe the end point that we want to navigate to, and provide all the supporting resources to get there, but they might not tell the learner or tell their direct report, if we're talking about a leader or a manager, exactly what to do on each step of the way. So that's where we want to get to with learning, is providing these tools and providing this context where we're telling people where this learning fits, but we're not just throwing the dart at the dartboard and saying this course here, take this course now. It's much more successful, and we have lots of data to support the use of a strong structured competency framework and content. You are going to see the things that we as learning professionals want to see, increases in utilization, increases in course completions. I hesitate to use those as the guiding lights, the things that we really want to strive for, because we know that that's not the end all be all of a successful training program, but they're definitely solid indicators and the easiest things we have to measure, as I'm sure everyone knows. So on the next slide, I'm going to dive into a little bit more kind of practical application. So if you are at a stage of your learning kind of development training team journey where you already have a competency framework built out, that's great. My message to you is to continue to use that methodology, and also to, going back to kind of the previous conversation, continue to weave that narrative into the full company to the best of your ability. Of course, it's easier said than done. And depending on how large the network of communication is, it can be more challenging. But the more that we can weave this common language into the full company picture, the more successful it's going to be. I'll use a personal example here at OpenSesame. One of our key values and a core competency that we target is the concept of support, and that extends to both internal and external customers. So when we say we have this kind of rallying cry internally, we'll support you every step of the way. And that is something that every new employee, every internal employee, it's so ingrained in the behavior and in the collective understanding, that it's something people will say all the time. You do a basic favor for someone, you say thank you, and you say, yep, just here to support you every step of the way. It's almost kind of that wink. You got this common language, and you know that that's just a part of who you are. So if we can create competencies that mirror the language that already exists through company values, cultural attributes, current events and trends. This is a big one, and it's been, of course, recently we've seen huge changes. I can't tell you how many more times I've seen the competency or the value of employee well-being come up in the past 18 months. That is just consistent. And under well-being or wellness, you might have concepts and skills like emotional intelligence, communicating with empathy, and self-compassion. That's something that's come up that I rarely used to see prior to this this global pandemic that we're all fighting our way through. So when we can create these skills and competencies that are in alignment with things that people are intimately familiar with on a day-to-day basis, that's the sweet spot, and that's what we really want to target. And if you're in a position where this is all, you know, you're embarking on a new training endeavor or planning for 2022, this is a great time to do this, and you don't have the full baked competency framework, my message to you is to not underestimate the power of your team and the power of the collective to build out something like this. Because as mentioned, we worked with hundreds, thousands of organizations of all sizes, and it really boils down to this fundamental kind of structure. It's simple at its core, and that is competencies that are tied to key skills. And then when you can tie a course or a learning asset or a learning object to a key skill and contextualize it and paint it in this big picture, that's giving employees the why, and that's giving them the support that they need. And it's demonstrating care, which is incredibly critical when we're talking about supporting our workforce. And then, of course, finally, the golden question, the question that always inevitably comes up: how do we measure the success? How do we iterate and improve and make sure that we're continually marching towards a successful, more and more successful learning journey for my learners? So, of course, we can use surveys to do this. We can look at things, we can look at utilization, we can look at course completions, we can look at course ratings if we're just talking about purely off the shelf training. And I will be quite honest with you all, when you're first getting started, if you're first getting started, you may not have all of the tools all the tools that you wish you had to get those live, real-time data and insights to keep improving. So I'm a big believer in the power of conversation. I hope it doesn't sound corny, but it's really, really impactful when you can use a survey, use even a conversation, hold drop-in hours, get those early adopters to start talking about their feedback, give candid, prompts. Which of these competencies resonates most with you all? Do you feel that this is that the framework we've landed on adequately or accurately reflects our company values and culture? Those sort of conversations, as much as I hate to say it, because I'm a data nerd, I love to see all the data and all the data points. The conversational, the anecdotal feedback can oftentimes in the early stages of this process be equally, if not more, impactful. So I think that as we move forward and we think about, as I pass along to Sean to talk a little bit more about advancing the business through this process, I would implore everyone on this call, if you take away one thing from the supporting segment, it's to curate the context, not just the content, and to provide learners with that why. That's kind of our common thread that I'd say is going to be successful, whether we're talking about internal or as we move into thinking about this in a broader, more external way. So Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Paige. And I think to kind of wind down our three goals, I would like to talk about how your learning programs today can help you expand the reach of your business. At Meridian, we help customers who have complex learning challenges, whether it's a commercial customer, a customer in the federal government, or customers in the state and local governments or membership-based associations. Our customers are all trying to do more to better serve their constituents. So as I talk about getting outside of the walls, I'd like you to consider not just a customer being somebody who is paying you money for your service, but somebody who you are trying to serve and better enable to work with your organization to see outcomes. And learning really can play a central role in your organization's growth in trying to expand the business. I'd like to really focus on 3 things over the next few minutes. The first is using your learning programs that you have today or with minor modifications to help expand your bottom line by opening new revenue streams. The second is to better serve your constituents or your customers by driving customer engagement through learning. And the third is to help you engage your channel partnerships and the partners that help you serve your customers and your constituents through learning to allow them to see better outcomes for themselves, for their customers, and for you as well. Gary, if we could go to the next slide. So as I mentioned at Meridian, our customers face complex learning challenges and we help them use software to solve them. We have a customer in the financial services industry who has generated over $100 million in revenue through the sale of proprietary content that they have developed. Now you may think, hey, our content's really not that valuable. And I'd ask you to really consider that. Your content may very well be valuable to those you serve and other organizations in different places of the market who may be symbiotic with you. There's a few different ways that you can look to monetize the content that you have today. The first is to directly sell the content to your end users. Oftentimes you'll have specific pieces of specific pieces of training content that will be of benefit to an individual, and you probably have the tools today to market to them and make them aware that they can take this content and buy it from you. You can then take that a step further and offer bundled content sales to your constituents. With this, you're allowing your prospective buyers to pick and choose a range of the content that you have available so that they can, in a single transaction, take not just one course and have one touch point with you, but have a range of monetizable touch points with your business. You can also offer ongoing learning content subscriptions for people who need to stay on top of the content that you provide and stay continually in contact with you. And lastly, the content that you've developed, you can also sell directly to other organizations so that they can make that content available to their employees. So in this B2B model, you're taking your proprietary information, the knowledge that you have that is inherently valuable, and you're making it available to others for a fee. Next, I'd like to talk about improving customer engagement through making your learning programs available to your customers or your constituents. Just a bottom line stat from the Technology Services Industry Association. Of trained customers, 15% are more likely, or 15% of trained customers are more likely to renew their program offerings and their subscriptions with you than customers who aren't trained. 68% of trained customers are going to be much more frequent users of your product. 56% of your customers are going to use more of the products that they get from you today. Training can really help you secure and add value to the relationships that you have with your customers as part of the offering that you give them today. There are other benefits to making training available to your customers. You can reduce the long-term costs of supporting them. They will be calling into your support desks and into your office less to ask for support on common things. You'll be driving up the frequency with which they use your products and your services. You'll be making yourself more sticky with them. And in doing so, you'll be adding more value to them so that they're much more likely to stay with you. And lastly, in this day and age, brand is almost everything to many people. And if you are building these relationships, not just with your products, but with also your brand through training, you're much more likely to see long-term benefits in the marketplace and with your constituencies. The last thing I'd like to cover over is how you can use your training outside of your virtual and your firewall to really build your partnerships relationships. At Meridian, one of our customers is a international automobile manufacturer. In the United States, they have over 500 independent dealerships who sell and service their vehicles. Brand, as I said a few moments ago, is really everything. If you don't know too much about the automobile industry in the United States of America, most dealerships are independently owned, and they are not obligated to follow the brand of the company that they sell. So for instance, if you go and you purchase a car from one manufacturer in a dealership, you may have a very different experience if you go and buy it from another dealer, whether it's the sales process or the services process. And that really will hurt the manufacturer's brand and their bottom line if both dealerships don't offer a top-notch experience. And so if you successfully use training to build your partnerships, you'll be able to both track and incentivize the behavior of your partners to be positive in your direction, whether it's to more effectively sell your products, more effectively service your products, or more effectively serve your customers. You'll be enabling the customer or your partner to better do those things. You'll also be able to provide the training to represent your brand. And lastly, you'll be able to drive sales and outcomes for your business through messaging and other updates to your training program and the offering that you're relying on your partner to deliver to the market on your behalf. Okay, I think that will wind us up. Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sean. We have a little bit of time here left, so I'm going to open it up for questions. We do have one question. How do you get a company to move beyond just check the box training to a more talent development strategy? And I think that, any one of our panelists can handle that question.
I'll take that, and probably Paige and I maybe can tag team that one a little bit. It really comes down to it has to be a top-down initiative, really. And it's a great question because, oftentimes training, as we presented there on the one slide, it's often, the training and education situation or question is something that you do because, again, because you have to. You have to take your sexual harassment. You have to take your anti-bribery, and your management has to take their, classes about how to be a manager and those types of things. But, just like your culture of your organization says things like that you're a Monday through Friday, and you give your employees the weekends off, and here's your holiday schedule, and that you have holiday parties at the end of the year, and here's the ways that you incentivize your employees, whether it's paychecks or you sponsor an internal company team, or that has sports or whatever. The education process has to be the same thing. You have to have it part of the organization's culture, in that whatever documentation that you lay out for your employees. All organizations have HR policies, as an example, that spell out, here's our PTO policy, here's our HR policy, here's our policy on this, that, and the other thing. Well, I can tell you that in virtually every organization that I've worked with or consulted with, I rarely, if ever, see a policy on education. I don't see something that says every employee is required to have X hours of education. And in that education, it should go further and say, X hours or X training should be towards compliance. X amount of time should be towards development, X amount of time should be towards personal growth, X amount of time should be towards something that the employee wants to go towards. In other words, I mentioned the word DNA earlier, or culture is, as I said, the education, senior leadership, senior management really has to look upon this just like it looks upon the rest of the policies, the rest of the decisions and the things that they implement that makes the company who they are. And that's really, when I talk to an organization about how to implement it, that's really what I bring to the table is, are you just simply, in January doing your check the box, and then that's the last time that any of the employees really get to think about, their educational requirements, or, is it something that's done as a year-round exercise? So, Paige, any thoughts from yourself?
Well, I just would say the exact same thing. I mean, we just did internally our objective and key result, or OKR planning for 2022. There's a whole objective that is purely focused on development, employee development, learning. And then of course, the key results under that objective, they cascade all the way down to the individual. And so in my conversations with my team as a manager here, each OKR individual goal planning meeting, that's a whole segment of it, is what are you all going to do for your professional development? What are you interested in learning? What would be a key skill that you really want to target to improve upon for your job? So when it starts at the company level, when it's written into our full team OKRs, then it empowers individual managers and it empowers individual contributors to think about education and learning as something that fits in the same, it's the same line item as, or in the same level as, our financial goals, as our innovation goals. So it's, it's all about elevating that and about making it apparent and accepted throughout the organization.
Yeah, good point. And it can't drop. It can't be, oh, we've run out of time, therefore let's simply drop it off. Because as you said, Paige, it has the same priority, the same strength that you wouldn't drop off doing your quarterly results to the board, or you wouldn't drop off, reporting to Wall Street or anything like that. So why would you drop off your training for your employees?
You make a really good point, Gary. And, I think one of the follow-up questions that we have kind of has a really good segue into what you were just saying, that, who would be in your minds, who would be those key stakeholders when you're building out those training programs and building out that new kind of paradigm shift, when you're talking about changing the culture a little bit and changing that DNA? Who would be those key stakeholders, like inside some of the organizations you guys have seen?
Yeah, so, and I kind of, alluded to this a little bit, didn't go into it a lot, but, when I mentioned that the learning and development organization, one of the challenges they have is that they're often viewed as not very, and I hate to say this because, again, with spending so much time of my career in that part of the organization, is, because they bring to the table often the metrics that the CXO table is not really as concerned about. The CXO doesn't really care. I mean, I'll be brutally honest here. Doesn't really care how many launches of a certain course, the company took, or how many completions they took, or how much time what was the average score on a certain test, as an example. What in order to be a power player and to bring learning and development and to raise this up so it becomes much more relevant and to become part of the organization, what has to happen, again, and this is just one person's opinion, but what has to happen is that the metrics and the analytics have to, merge the learning analytics with the operational analytics, that, whether it's the financials, whether it's take a sales, the sales part of the organization, compare and contrast, one part of the organization that has taken a certain set of, courses and so forth, compare and contrast that to the other part of the sales organization that has not taken that, show the efficiency and the effectiveness of the sales organization. How are they doing, in their, closing and their quota attainment and the size of the deals and things like that. So, I mean, that's just one way, take the learning numbers, the analytics, marry them to the overall, look at what the CXOs, what their goals and what they're concerned about, and marry, the learning numbers to those numbers. And then all of a sudden, guess what? Now, all of a sudden, education will become much more important when you can prove and show that those numbers are making an effect on the company line. When Sean was talking and he talked about how training is affecting some of these companies, when learning can truly show that it can affect these companies' numbers, whether they're bottom line numbers, whether they're partner numbers, whether they're some of these other numbers, that's when the difference will be made.
Paige, Sean, do you guys have anything to add to that?
No, I think Gary said it well.
Yeah, he really did. He really did. Leading, you mentioned, the story and creating that story from a direct, impact of those learning metrics. And, it isn't always easy to connect those dots. And I think you clearly stated that, but being able to draw from those objectives, and really tie them back to, to the learning metrics is something, if, when companies can do that, it really does boost the competency and the support and the credibility of those training programs. So that's really great. I mean, when you're building out those competency frameworks though, do you build them into the LMS though? Or do you, when you're building out these competency frameworks that you can then tell the story to tie them back to those business objectives, are you building them into the LMS, or are you building them into something separate so that you can then tell that story?
I would answer here that we want everything to be a part of LMS, LXP, where whatever the learner experience is, whatever that looks like, which can vary a lot these days. Right. Your competencies, it should really inform the taxonomy that you're building. So absolutely is the answer. It should be built into your learning management system or to whatever your platform is that learners are accessing. So that, I mean, I've seen it done really effectively actually, where it is the top banner that you see when you log into the portal to access your learning. You have your 8 different key core competencies. You click into one, and it takes you to all of the skills that would then roll up to that competency. And I think that that's I've seen clients who have had great success with that method, but as long as it's really clear wherever learners are accessing training, that framework is there, because again, it's all about that transparency and it's all about the consistency of contextualization. So I think that's what I would recommend is yes, absolutely build your competencies into the platform where learners are accessing the content.
Yeah, gosh, we could have a whole another webinar on just that topic alone, and about, integrating and unifying, platforms and so forth, because the one thing you certainly don't want to do, and, you want to talk about frustration of the employee and so forth. Yeah, start putting all these put the competencies on one platform, the LMS on another platform, and the goals and so forth on another platform and so forth. And guess what? You've got a license for failure, for your compliance and education goals. But as Paige said, exactly, that the idea here is not just to put the frameworks together, put the competency together, but really to put a bow around it, put it on a unified platform so that it makes it easy for the employee to get access to it, for the manager to manage it, for the L&D people to operationalize the metrics and so forth, and then for the overall organization to then look at how the competencies and the L&D marries into the rest of the organization. Because if all that is not tied in, then you've just got a bunch of disparate systems that, again, just make the whole thing hard to work together.
That's great. And, we're coming close to the top of the hour. I want to thank our panelists today. Just as a side note, just to let everyone know, we have another webinar event coming up where we're going to be kind of doubling down on the topic of compliance training done right, and really focused on the strategic programs you can put in place to help mitigate that risk and drive those results, and really tie back to those business outcomes that we know is, probably one of the most beneficial attributes of your learning program. We've put the link to the registration into chat for you. It'll also be part of the replay here when you get this replay of this recording. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. I've asked Carla here to put in our direct link to reach out to us, and we can help you to, get started with conversations about compliance training at your organization. With that, I will shut it down. I will thank everyone for joining us today, and thank our distinguished panel for their expertise and sharing their knowledge with us today. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.